Welcome to the Explainer. When it comes to Christian end times theology, there are a few puzzles that can really trip people up. Today we're tackling a big one, untangling a couple of key phrases in the Bible that cause a lot of confusion. All right, let's just dive right in. A lot of people will point to one specific passage in Second Thessalonians and say, see, this is proof right here that the church has to go through a future time of global trial. But is that really what the verse is saying? Let's take a closer look. So this is the verse at the very center of the whole debate. You've got the Apostle Paul, and he's writing to this church, and they are clearly freaking out. He's telling them, hey, don't be troubled by this rumor that the day of Christ has already started. Now, to really get his points, we have to first understand what he meant by that specific phrase. Okay, first things first, we got to define our terms. What in the world is the day of Christ? Because, the source material we're looking at says that if you get this one phrase right, the whole passage just clicks into place. Okay, check this out, because this is where it gets really interesting. The phrase day of the Lord is all over the Old Testament, and it always refers to a future time of God's judgment. So the argument goes that the early Christians who saw Jesus as Lord just took that same idea and applied it to him. So day of the Lord, day of Christ, fundamentally, they're talking about the same thing. So here is the absolute key takeaway. According to this interpretation, the day of Christ is not that single instantaneous event of the rapture. Nope. It's the entire 7-year period of trial and judgment on earth, what we call the tribulation. And let me tell you, that distinction, it changes everything. All right, so with that definition locked in, let's circle back to those folks in Thessalonica. Why were they so completely terrified? Paul urges them not to be shaken in mind or troubled. And the original Greek here isn't just talking about being a little worried. It's describing a deep-seated fear, full-blown panic. And that reaction itself, well, that's a huge clue for us. So here's what was going on. They got some fake news, maybe a forged letter that looked like it was from Paul, and it told them, hey, the day of Christ, the tribulation, it's already started. And what was their reaction? Total panic. And this is where you have to stop and think, right? If Paul had taught them, hey guys, you're supposed to go through the tribulation, why would they be terrified? Shouldn't their reaction have been more like, okay, it's here, time to get ready, not this complete meltdown? And boom, that's the whole argument right there. Their fear makes zero sense, unless they believed they were supposed to escape that time of judgment. Their panic wasn't about being in the tribulation. It was the horrifying thought that the rapture had already happened, and they had been left behind. So how does Paul comfort them? He doesn't say, hey, suck it up. No, he pulls out a checklist. He basically says, look, you can relax because the day of the Lord can't even begin until these two huge things happen first. And since those things hadn't happened yet, they could breathe a sigh of relief. They weren't in the tribulation after all. This whole idea of an escape isn't just something you find in Thessalonians. The sources we're looking at show it's a theme that pops up in other parts of the Bible too. I mean, look at Revelation. There's a promise to be kept from the hour of trial that's coming on the whole world. Then in Luke's gospel, Jesus himself says to pray that you'll be able to escape all these things and to stand before him. And then you've got John, where Jesus says he's coming again to receive believers to himself. See the pattern? It's all about deliverance, not just toughing it out. And that verse from John's gospel, it gets really specific about the destination. The whole point is to be taken out of this world, to be where Jesus is, in the Father's house. I mean, that really drives home the idea of a physical removal from the world before all the trouble starts. Okay, so let's put all the puzzle pieces together. When you line all this up, what's the big picture? What's the promise we're supposed to hold on to? Well, the takeaway here is that this view creates a really consistent picture. You've got the Thessalonians' fear, Paul's very specific way of comforting them, and all these other promises. And they all point to the same thing, a message of hope, a rescue, not a trial by fire. And this is exactly why the Apostle Paul, writing somewhere else, calls this whole thing our blessed hope. The focus isn't on digging in and bracing for God's wrath. It's all about that joyful, hopeful waiting, looking for that moment when we're united with Christ before that judgment falls on the world. And that really leaves us with something to chew on, doesn't it? If this view is right, the promise isn't about hunkering down for a storm. It's about looking up for a rescue. So how does focusing on a blessed hope instead of a fearful trial change the way a person lives right here, right now? That's a great question to think about. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.